Hey guys, if you could subscribe to our channel and like our videos, that'd be a big help to what we do on a day-to-day basis. Tonight I want to put up a video specifically on the topic of mock tongues. This is something that is popping up in some churches in our area in Southern California, and I wanted to address this topic tonight. Mock tongues is sort of the idea that there are people in some churches that feel like they have to sort of fake the gift of tongues in order to be seen as sort of a spiritually mature in their walk with the Lord, and unfortunately, this puts a lot of burden on people. Um, and these are people who do not naturally do not have the spiritual gift of speaking in tongues, but they feel like, oh man, I'm not going to be seen as like mature in my walk with the Lord or mature in my church unless I fake speaking in tongues. And I believe that um, obviously I have friends that are continuationists, I have friends that are full cessationists, I have friends that are partial cessationists. Um, and, I think I have friends that believe that tongues are for today, I have friends that believe that tongues have ceased. And I think that on that note, I think with the idea of the gift of tongues, personally, I think that's something that really um, is specifically to edify and build up a local church, and specifically really to be used in the context of a local church. I don't really understand the idea of somebody having the gift of tongues as a private prayer language, so they can just sort of bust out tongues in their closet and somehow have like a deeper prayer experience without really the connection of the local church. I think that tongues really is saying that because it is a spiritual gift, and really the idea behind the spiritual gifts are to specifically edify and build up the church. The reason why people have different gifts is to essentially get plugged into a local church, and then they can utilize their specific spiritual gift in the context of the local church. The pastor is an example of someone who has the gift of teaching, and in the local church they're able to operate and utilize their gift of teaching to build up and edify that local church, and also to help essentially proclaim the word of God week in, week out, and see people grow in their faith because of their specific gifting as being a teacher and also a shepherd of flock. And they were able to then contribute to their specific church that they pastor and shepherd, uh, and really operate in that teaching gift of teaching that the Lord has given them to teach the local church at hand. And I think with the gift of tongues, I really believe it's a gift to edify and build up the local church, really like all the spiritual gifts are meant for, to operate and to edify and build up the local church. I think regarding this topic of mock tongues, I think it's really a bummer that people feel like they have to fake the gift of tongues in order to fit in a church. And when specifically I'm talking about mock tongues are people sort of saying something that they think sounds like it's in tongues, even though it's just sort of them busting out something randomly. Usually we'll see that people say should have bought a Honda. It literally sounds like should have bought a Honda, or other things like that in that nature. It's important too, I believe that tongues is we're talking about real languages. I'm reminded back into sort of the upper room in the book of Acts, and the idea of people, really receiving the gift of being able to communicate in languages that they did not know previously, in a supernatural fashion, in a fashion that is a result of really supernatural phenomena that is specifically a spiritual gift from the Lord. I believe the gift of tongues is for today, but I believe that when we talk about tongues, that this is a gift of a literal language, a foreign language that you do not know previously. My wife has an experience with this on a mission trip, going to a mission trip to a foreign country, and she didn't know a lick of the foreign language when she landed in that foreign country, and she was able to speak that language perfectly upon the mission trip. And I think that's an example of the gift of tongues operating in today's modern world. I believe the gift of tongues is for today, but I believe these are the gift to speak other real languages, not sort of close, sort of made up baby gibberish, but actual tangible real languages. If I do not know Spanish, then and I go on, let's say, a mission trip to an area where people are fluent in Spanish, and somehow by the grace of God, I'm given the ability to speak the language of Spanish, to be able to effectively communicate the message of the gospel and witness to those who do not know Christ and preach the gospel. because I'm able to communicate to them in the language of Spanish, then that really is essentially a good example, or would be a good example of the gift of tongues, I believe. I believe tongues is meant to edify and build up the local church. And I really, saying I always come back to this 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 27 to 28, where it states, "If any speak in a tongue, let there be only 2 or 3 at most free, and each in turn, and let someone interpret. But if there is no one to interpret, let each of them keep silent in church and speak to himself and to God." I think there in 1 Corinthians, it's pretty clear that we also need somebody to interpret regarding the gift of tongues. I've seen this happen twice in my walk with the Lord ever. I don't think it's something that common, to be honest. But this is where somebody gets up to speak in tongues. They speak in a specific foreign language in the context of a local church gathering during church service, and someone else at that same time gets up to interpret that specific message that's in a foreign language. They get up and they interpret the tongue. So there's someone there who has the gift of tongues and someone there to interpret the gift of tongues at the exact same time. And I think it's critical that with tongues that there is someone there present with the gift of interpretation, because otherwise they're not going to understand, people won't be able to really understand what is being said. So I think that's really critical that there's someone to interpret the tongue present in the assembly of believers during that gathering or church service where the gift of tongues is in operation. Personally, I think, at least for me personally, this is my personal view. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I think personally, when you have the gift of tongues and people are just sort of randomly busting out in tongues, I don't have a problem being in a church where people are, praying in tongues under their breath. But when people are just sort of busting out random stuff and sort of really essentially being a distraction in the context of a local church thing, I think that actually sort of can stumble people in their walk with the Lord, and I have to be careful of that. And I think it's hard too, because really, when we get back to the crux that we've been talking about here, I think it's hard because I think really tongues is meant to build up the local church. I think even when the people sort of speaking in tongues underneath their breath, they're not really using that gift to edify the body if there is no one there to interpret that message. It's sort of just, I know they'll probably use things like the idea of sort of this mysteries of God or sort of mysterious prayer language thing to sort of justify that. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I think that it's really meant to be saying that there's someone who has the gift of interpretation, so it can be used to edify and build up a local church. So I just want to talk a little about the gift of tongues tonight. And I think too with mock tongues, like what this video is supposed to be about, I went on a little bit of a rant in general. Mock tongues is really something that, unfortunately, I think there are a lot of people who can be maybe like insecure in their walk with the Lord, and they feel like they have to have the gift of tongues in order to fit in a certain church. And I think the great thing is that you don't have to fake the gift of tongues. You might have maybe a different spiritual gift in your walk with the Lord, and if that is the case, I'd really encourage you to get discipled maybe by someone who's older in the faith, so they can maybe help you figure out what your spiritual gift is. If it isn't the gift of tongues, maybe you have a different gift. Maybe you have the gift of teaching. Maybe you have a gift of service, a gift of hospitality. I mean, there are a whole myriad of different spiritual gifts that the Bible lists, and I'd encourage you to get discipled by someone so they can help you, like a mentor, in the context of your local church, figure out what your specific gifting is in terms of your spiritual gifts. So there's a quick video on the topic of tongues, sort of a rant. And like I said, I was talking about mock tongues in this video, which is people sort of feeling the need to fake speaking in tongues in order to fit in their church. I think it's really a bummer if people feel like they have to fake speaking in tongues in order to fit in the church that they attend. I would hope that you could just be yourself and fit in your local church, and hopefully maybe figure out where your spiritual gifts are and how you can get involved in the context of your local church. So this is sort of a rant video, guys. God bless and have an awesome day.